The house looked the same as it always had, wrapped in warm yellow light and the illusion of welcome. I stood on the porch for a moment before knocking, holding a pie I bought on the way because showing up empty-handed always felt like another silent accusation. Laughter spilled through the door, familiar voices overlapping, already mid-conversation without me. When the door opened, I was greeted with quick hugs, distracted smiles, and the sense that my arrival was more ceremonial than meaningful. The dining table was full when I sat down, everyone already settled into their usual places. My chair waited at the far end, like it always did, close enough to be included but far enough to be overlooked. The smell of roasted turkey and spiced stuffing filled the air, comforting and heavy, like a memory that refused to change. For a moment I let myself believe this year might be different. That maybe time had softened things. That maybe I'd finally be seen. Conversation flowed easily around me. Promotions were announced. Engagement celebrated. Someone talked about buying a new car, another about a vacation planned months in advance. Each success was met with admiration, applause, pride. When the conversation finally drifted toward me, it felt less like interest and more like inspection. So my uncle said, leaning back in his chair, fork poised midair, "Are you still doing that independent work?" I nodded, already bracing myself. "Yes, it's actually been growing a lot this year." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That kind of work is risky, no safety net." Across the table, my cousin let out a small laugh. "I could never live like that. Not knowing what your future looks like." A few heads nodded. Someone murmured agreement. I opened my mouth to explain, to talk about the long nights, the contracts signed, the goals quietly met, but the moment passed before I could claim it. The conversation rolled right over me. My mother dabbed her lips with a napkin and sighed. "We just worry. You've always done things the hard way." The hard way, as if it were a flaw instead of a choice. My sister took a sip of wine and tilted her head. "I mean, stability matters. Especially at this age." That phrase hit harder than I expected. At this age. Like time itself was something I'd wasted, something I was running out of. I glanced around the table, hoping someone might notice the tension creeping into my shoulders, the way my hands curled tightly in my lap. No one did. My father finally spoke, his voice calm, measured, the way it always was when he thought he was being reasonable. "You had potential. Everyone could see that. But potential only means something if you do something with it." The room went quiet. I felt heat rush to my face, not from anger, but from the familiar sting of disappointment, his not mine. I had done something with it. I had done everything quietly, invisibly, without asking for praise. I had helped when no one else could. I had covered gaps no one wanted to acknowledge. But those things didn't come with titles or neat explanations, so they didn't count. Then he said it. "I guess some people just don't make it." Failure hung in the air like smoke. No one corrected him. No one defended me. Forks moved again, conversation resumed, and just like that, the moment passed for everyone else. But something inside me didn't. I stared down at my plate, food untouched, appetite gone. In that instant, I understood something with painful clarity. I wasn't being challenged because they believed in me. I was being diminished because it made them comfortable. My value here had never been about who I was, only about what I provided quietly and without complaint. I smiled when someone asked me to pass the potatoes. I nodded when my mother said she hoped things would work out. For me, I laughed softly at a joke I didn't hear. But inside, something settled. This wasn't home. And for the first time, I allowed myself to accept that truth. I waited until the house went quiet. The laughter faded, the television volume dropped, doors closed one by one. Footsteps creaked along the hallway, then disappeared. When the lights finally went out, I sat up in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of a place that no longer felt like mine. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, pressing down on my chest, daring me to stay where I no longer belonged. I got out of bed and turned on the small lamp by the dresser. Its soft glow barely reached the corners of the room, but it was enough. I pulled my suitcase from the closet and set it on the floor. The zipper sounded too loud in the stillness, like it might wake someone, like it might invite questions I wasn't ready to answer, but no one came. I folded my clothes carefully, as if respect could still be shown even when none had been given. Each shirt carried a memory: late nights working at the kitchen table, phone calls taken in whispers, deadlines met while everyone else slept. I remembered sitting right where I was now, years ago, sending money without being asked because emergencies had a way of finding this family. The car that broke down, the bill that couldn't wait, the just this once, that happened over and over again. They never called it support, they called it help. I paused with a sweater in my hands, the fabric worn soft from use. I remembered the winter I paid the heating bill without telling anyone, afraid the house would go cold. No thank you, no acknowledgement. Just relief that something had been handled, as if it were expected. The suitcase slowly filled, and with every item I felt something loosen inside me. Not anger, not sadness, just clarity. When I finished packing, I sat on the edge of the bed and reached for my laptop. The screen lit up familiar and comforting. This, at least, had always been honest with me. I logged into the first account without hesitation. Then the second, then the third. Names blurred together, joint accounts, shared responsibilities, obligations that had quietly become mine alone. My name was everywhere. I stared at it on the screen, realizing how deeply I had embedded myself into the structure of their lives. Not because I was asked to, but because I was capable. Because I believed family meant showing up even when it hurt. Because I thought love was proven by sacrifice. I clicked through the options slowly, deliberately. No sudden moves, no emotional decisions. I wasn't taking anything that wasn't mine. I wasn't punishing anyone. I was simply stepping back from roles I had never agreed to carry forever. Freeze access. Confirm. Each click felt strangely calm. There was no rush of triumph, no surge of revenge. Just a quiet sense of finality, like closing a door you've been holding open for too long. I closed the laptop and looked around the room one last time. The walls were bare, the bed neatly made. It felt impersonal, temporary, exactly what it was meant to be. I wrote a short note and left it on the kitchen counter, weighed down by my keys. I didn't explain myself, I didn't apologize. I didn't ask to be understood. I picked up my suitcase and moved through the house slowly, memorizing the sound of my footsteps, the way the floor dipped slightly near the stairs, the hum of the refrigerator in the dark. This place held years of my effort, my patience, my silence. But it no longer held me. At the front door I hesitated for just a second, not because I wanted to stay, but because leaving meant accepting something I'd avoided for years, that sometimes walking away is the only way to be honest with yourself. I stepped outside, the cold air biting against my skin. The door closed behind me with a soft click, final and unceremonious. I didn't look back. For the first time that night, my chest felt light. Whatever came next, it would be mine. Morning came quietly, without alarms or urgency. Pale light slipped through the thin hotel curtains, landing across the unfamiliar ceiling. For a moment, I forgot where I was, then memory settled in, steady and calm, not sharp like regret, not heavy like fear. Just present. I sat up slowly, listening. No voices down the hall, no expectations waiting in the next room. Only stillness. I reached for my phone. The screen lit up instantly, crowded with missed calls and notifications. My name filled the lock screen in ways it never had before. Messages stacked on top of each other, each more urgent than the last. I didn't open them right away. Instead, I set the phone down and went to make coffee from the small machine on the counter. It sputtered and hissed, producing something bitter and barely warm, but it was enough. When I finally checked the messages, the pattern was clear: confusion first, then concern, then panic. Something's wrong with the bank? My card isn't working. Did you change something? The calls came from numbers I knew by heart, voices I had answered for years without hesitation. Now they sounded distant, almost unfamiliar, like echoes from a life I'd already stepped out of. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop again, not to change anything, but to review what I'd already done. Everything was exactly where it should be: clean, orderly, thoughtful. I hadn't burned bridges. I'd simply stopped holding them up alone. I went for a walk after breakfast. The air was sharp, carrying the scent of wet pavement and fallen leaves. People passed me without looking twice, wrapped in their own routines, their own lives. For the first time in a long while, I felt invisible in a way that was freeing, not dismissive. No one here expected anything from me. Back in the room, the phone buzzed again. A voicemail this time. I let it play. There was irritation in the voice at first, then disbelief. "We need to talk. This isn't funny." Another message followed minutes later, softer, edged with worry. "Please call back. We don't understand what's happening." I understood. I had understood for years. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling, letting the emotions come without trying to name them. There was guilt, faint but persistent. There was relief, stronger than I'd expected. There was sadness, not for what I'd done, but for how long it had taken me to do it. By afternoon, the messages changed again. Accusations crept in, frustration sharpened. Words that had once been saved for behind closed doors now spilled freely across my screen. I didn't argue with them. I didn't defend myself. Silence had become my answer, and it said more than explanations ever could. As evening approached, the phone grew quiet. Either they had run out of things to say, Or they were finally beginning to look at each other instead of at me. I hoped it was the second. I ordered dinner and ate slowly, tasting my food instead of swallowing it out of habit. Outside, the sky darkened, streetlights flickering on one by one. The world kept moving, indifferent to the small collapse happening somewhere else. That realization brought an unexpected comfort. That night, I slept deeply. No dreams chased me, no voices pulled me back. When I woke again, there were no new messages waiting. The absence felt deliberate, like a pause rather than an ending. I knew consequences would follow. Conversations would happen. Stories would be rewritten with me cast as the villain or the ingrate. That was out of my control. What mattered was that, for the first time, the weight I'd been carrying wasn't mine anymore. I hadn't taken revenge. I had taken myself out of a system that thrived on my silence. And in that quiet hotel room, with nothing but my name to answer to, I felt something settle into place. Peace. Time did what it always does when you finally stop fighting it, it moved forward. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and life began to take shape around the choices I had made, not loudly, not dramatically, just steadily. I found a small apartment with creaking floors and windows that let in too much light in the mornings. I filled it slowly, only with things I loved or truly needed. There was no rush to prove anything to anyone. Work came next. Not immediately and not without effort, but honestly. The kind of work that asked something of me and gave something back in return. I learned what it felt like to log off at night without resentment in my chest, to earn money without quietly wondering who else it would have to save. Every decision I made belonged to me alone, and that freedom changed how I carried myself through the world. The messages never fully stopped, but they changed. The anger faded first, then the urgency. What remained were brief, careful attempts at connection, neutral updates, questions that sounded like invitations but carried the weight of expectation. I read them when they came, sometimes more than once, and then let them go unanswered. Not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. I heard things through others. That adjustments had been made, that plans had been canceled, that the house felt quieter now. They were learning, slowly, what it meant to manage without a safety net they'd never acknowledged as one. I didn't take pleasure in it. I didn't need to. The truth was doing its own work. One afternoon, nearly a year after that Thanksgiving, I ran into my father by chance. A grocery store aisle, the kind of place where nothing important is supposed to happen. He looked older, smaller somehow. When he saw me, his expression shifted through surprise, hesitation, and something like regret. "You look well," he said. I nodded. "I am." He waited as if expecting more. An explanation, a reopening. I offered neither. We spoke briefly about nothing at all, the weather, the line at the register. Then we parted ways. No apologies were exchanged. None were needed. The distance between us was no longer painful. It was simply real. That was when I understood what my revenge truly was. It wasn't the frozen accounts or the unanswered calls. Those were just boundaries drawn at last. The real reckoning was that I no longer needed their validation to feel complete. I had stepped out of the role they assigned me, and in doing so, on the next Thanksgiving, I cooked for myself. Nothing elaborate. Just enough. I set the table by the window, lit a candle, and ate slowly. Outside, the city hummed with its usual rhythm, unaware of the quiet victory taking place inside one small apartment. I didn't feel lonely. I felt proud of the person who packed a suitcase instead of swallowing another insult. Proud of the one who chose peace over permission. Proud of the version of me who finally understood that love does not require self-erasure. Somewhere they were telling a story about me. I let them. Stories change depending on who tells them. What mattered was the life I was living now, steady, honest, and fully my own. I cleaned the dishes, turned off the lights, and stood by the window for a moment before bed. The reflection looking back at me was calm, grounded, unafraid. That was the sweetest revenge of all.